Hello, this is Steven out, and yes, we are back with another Batman movie review. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I will be reviewing the 1997 Batman and Robin. Oh boy, this film is unique in the not just the Batman film series, but comic book films in general, because it already has a lot of baggage and is just infamous for being arguably considered one of, if not possibly, the worst comic book film in all of cinema. Now, I will be blunt, I will probably be very much bad-mouthing this film, or at least, I should be honest, very harsh towards this film. But I should be noted, at one point in my life, I actually liked it. But that's because I was younger at the time, and this was something that would entertain a little kid. But as a person who's not only gotten older and would prefer his Batman films to be, well, a bit more darker, but doesn't mind lightheartedness at the same time. But let's actually get into a bit of background to how this became to be. Well, after the success of Batman Forever, the studio really wanted to continue with the lighthearted take. As a result, they basically really made Joel Schumacher really focus more on that. And it should be noted, Joel Schumacher has apologized on numerous occasions for this film. As he has stated, it was never his intention to offend people. His intention was to entertain. And when I was a little kid, I was entertained by this film. But as I got older, and I realized about this film's reputation, I began to see what they were seeing and also begin to basically have this be the Batman film I'm going back to least. But, hey, with that said, is there still some enjoyment to be found in this film? Well, before we do get into the plot and my final thoughts, let's get into the cast, shall we? Okay, the cast for this film. Batman has been recasted yet again. Instead of Val Kilmer not coming back as to why he's still left, well, up in the air, they got George Clooney to be casted as Batman. Now, this sounds like a casting choice that would have worked well, especially as Bruce Wayne. But my problem, and I'm sure many people have had, is that he's just bland. He doesn't do anything to make either Batman or Bruce interesting, and doesn't bring anything unique to the role. George Clooney signed on thinking it would be a good career move, and he, just like Joel, has apologized to fans of what ultimately Batman and Robin became to fans, which being a disappointment. Chris O'Donnell is back as Robin. Now, I stated in Batman Forever, I didn't mind what they did with the character and really liked it. Here, not so much. Becomes too whiny and eye-rolling. He's like Xander from Wednesday, a character that is not fully bad, if I could be really quite blunt, but the fact he complains a lot, just is just eye-rolling, and yeah, it's just like, is that like friend I guess you have around that constantly complains and you're just really annoyed by it, if that makes any sense. That's how I've always viewed him. He's not bad, but god does he whine a lot. But this film does actually introduce a character that I was actually surprised and was my first introduction to, and that was Batgirl, portrayed by Alicia Silverstone. I'll double check, I believe that's the actress's name. Yeah, Alicia Silverstone. Now, Batgirl in this film is different. In the comics, we know that at least the iconic Batgirl, with the classic red-headed one, is of course Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon's daughter. But in the film, she is Barbara Wilson, and is Alfred's niece. And what I love about it is if they give Alfred some family. That's actually rarely happened in the comics, where, like the main characters like Bruce and Dick interact with members of the Pennyworth family. So I kind of like that. However, despite some uniqueness I appreciate, I am not a fan of how Alicia Stones portrays her. This is a character I could actually like, but for the most part, she just comes off as miscast, and maybe doesn't have the full confidence to pull this character off. However, one person who can always be guaranteed to give a great performance, despite what is given, is Michael Goff as Alfred. One of the most consistently great things within all of these 4 Batman films. And I like especially how he's more of this father figure, not only to Bruce, and is given more of a storyline, but the fact that, he also becomes but also the relationship between this version of Batgirl, and this version of Alfred. I really like it. But let's look at Gordon, still portrayed by Pat Hingle, if I still recall correctly. Yep, Pat Hingle, that's it. Honestly, he's become Chief O'Hara. He's even wearing the suit Chief O'Hara wore a lot in the old TV show. He's a bumbling idiot. True, he does one thing to help save the day, but he's become almost, the character has devolved, and I just don't know what caused that. Anyway, but with that, let's get into the villains, this was also my first introduction to many of these villains. One is Mr. Freeze, portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. A bizarre casting choice, but I felt actually would have worked better for Bane than Mr. Freeze. Hear me out. Mr. Freeze in this film acts like the character from the old Adam West 60s show. And true, that can work for that. But the problem is that the backstory they gave to this Freeze was the current one that was introduced in Batman the Animated Series. So there's a bit of a conflict in both characterization and even in the backstory. Because of that constant colliding, it just doesn't work. And I will get more into it, maybe a bit more. I will get into it a bit more. But again, the fact this was my introduction to Mr. Freeze should be something to write home about. Also, another thing is my introduction to is Poison Ivy, portrayed by Uma Thurman. Now, I'm pretty sure Uma Thurman is basically known for the Kill Bill films, as I think it was The Bride her character was. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Honestly, she's just there. Well, not there. She plays this sort of evil femme fatale they're trying to go with. But also, Poison Ivy was meant to be this villainess who was beautiful and gorgeous. And I'm not saying Uma Thurman isn't. But I just feel that the look of the character does a disservice not only to the comic book character, but even Uma Thurman. This character, at least like that costume you're seeing that she's wearing now, is not my personal favorite. I actually like what she wore a bit in a scene where they take over this gang's lair. I liked that look, and when they crash the ball, that's the look I like. This, not so much. I mean, it's leather, basically. She would never wear that. Another thing this film also introduced me to was the character of Bane. Now, Bane was pretty new in the comics in the 90s, appearing basically in the Nightfall, which is, of course, his first appearance. Basically, they just took him and basically made him as Poison Ivy's muscle. Now, Bane here was portrayed by a real-life wrestler. What's the name? I have it written down here. Pray I could still find it. Probably not. Damn you. Bane here was portrayed by... God, I really should have. I have it written here. I'm sorry. Robert Swanson. Now, I actually like the visual look of the character. It's like the character ripped straight from the comics, though a little bit cheesy in some areas. My problem is he's used too much of them as the muscle and less of the brain. Because what was unique about Bane in the comics, he was a person that that was both brawn and brain. Here, he's just a dumb, mindless thug who grunts and does these moans and would repeat certain lines. I don't mind the look of the character. I got nothing against the actor, but I personally feel that, that the character is completely goes against what was great about him in the comics. Other minor characters is, surprisingly, Dr. Jason Woodrue, who in the comics later became the Pharaonic Man, and has a lot of histories and ties to Poison Ivy in the comics. He's portrayed by John Glover, aka the guy that freaking voiced the Riddler in Batman the Animated Series. Of course, he's best known, obviously being in Smallville as Lex Luthor's dad, which was another great performance. And here, he just, honestly, despite how much small role and how silly it is, like his performance is, arguably, he is still an absolute delight, and I absolutely love that. And here, Bruce's love interest is, basically, the character is Julie Manderson, portrayed by Ella McPherson, probably butchering the actress's name, and basically is Bruce's love interest. Out of all the love interests in the first 4 films, this one's probably the weakest, because she's just, and surprisingly, she came from the comics, just like Vicky Vale. And I do like how the character's written to be not only this love interest, but it's more of an afterthought. And, well, basically, it's almost serious to personally be a actual marriage. And it's also interesting, this is a female love interest who doesn't find out about Bruce's identity. I don't know, I find those interesting in a character I just couldn't really give that much interest or care about. It's just that. Anyway, with such a long into the cast, let's actually get into the plot. We begin the Joel Schumacher films with how we always do, the opening credits that introduce the actors' names and into the symbol that we've seen in Batman Forever, of course. And then we see them suit up, get their gear, and we see our characters hop into, essentially their vehicles. Now, I want to point out something. This Batman costume, meh. I don't really love it, or more accurately, don't really like it that much. It's just meh. And especially the nipple problem. Again, that's what people have always written home about with this. But the Robin costume, I actually like. Why? Well, first off, the design is definitely different and caught my eye when I first saw it as a kid. It's obviously meant to be an homage to the Nightwing character that Dick does later become, and I actually like it. I don't mind the costume. I really do. If they just got rid of the nipples, I would obviously find it much better. And then, of course, the characters get into their respective vehicles. Batman gets into his new Batmobile, but God, it looks too much like a toy and less cool like the previous Batmobiles were. But the Robin cycle, I actually liked. Or a Redbird, I think is what they called it in the film. Basically, they ride off through the Batcave, obviously to go and take down a new villain that has suddenly appeared at the Gotham City museum, where basically guards are frozen in ice, and Gordon basically reveals that it's a guy calling himself Mr. Freeze. Also in this scene, we get hints to, that Alfred may not be well, and this will affect his character later on in the film. Eventually, we do go to the museum where, Mr. Freeze is attacking and begins freezing people. The effects are just silly. Not so much the ray gun, the freeze ray, or freeze gun, because that's a cool design. And I don't mind the CGI that's used when it's sprayed. But after people are frozen, they look like they're just in plastic. And not so much ice. Also, this is something that this Freeze is known for, hammering up the scenes and just being just so cartoony. Also, the design of the character, it just looks just bizarre. The henchman also dressed up in hockey gear is just odd as well. I'm not a fan of the look so far. But basically, Mr. Freeze is causing all this chaos to steal a diamond. And just as he gets his hands on it, Batman comes through the ceiling, and George Clooney probably delivers probably one of the most weakest lines, saying, "Hi Freeze, I'm Batman." He doesn't make it in a gruff tone. He doesn't, do anything different. Eventually, Robin also makes his way in, and basically a fight breaks out. They put Mr. Freeze's freeze ray on top of an exhibit. They fight the henchman just as they're recovering the diamond. This is just bizarre, and you can really tell that this film was heavily influenced clearly by the old Adam West 60s show. And again, whilst this might work for that, I don't think it feels it works for this film, or this late into Batman, because this would not work with the more darker take. Anyway, Freeze eventually gets his gun back. The dynamic duo get their hands back on the diamond, and basically Freeze, with another chilly one-liner, and I really regret saying that pun, freezes a statue dinosaur, which causes it to somehow collapse, and basically the dynamic duo lose the diamond. Freeze gets his hands on it, and his car turns into an actual rocket. Anyway, Batman and Robin eventually make their way onto the rocket. Well, Batman is inside, Robin's on the outside. As the rocket is getting further and further, up into the sky, Mr. Freeze ejects himself, and Robin makes his way in, rescuing Batman and setting a bomb for the rocket to explode, and basically end up skydiving, or sky surfing actually, to chase after Mr. Freeze. Robin gets his hand back on the diamond, and basically Batman is trying to take Freeze down. Eventually, they end up, I don't know, in some random building, and the dynamic duo chase him, only for Mr. Freeze to immediately fire a freeze ray at Robin. He gets his hand back on the diamond and gives Batman an ultimatum: follow me or save the boy. And basically, Freeze makes his escape, and Batman does the right thing and saves Robin. However, I will admit, I did get this one funny line that did make me chuckle a bit. When Robin is saved with when Batman put him in this water and used a ray to turn it hot, resulting in the ice melting, he comes out saying, "Did we get him?" Now, I actually found that legit funny. The next scene is actually in some jungle, where we essentially get to see the beginnings of Poison Ivy's origin. Here, Pamela Isley has been doing research on basically to give plants the ability to fight back. And just like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Uma Thurman is just hammering up the scenery and is very much just eye-rolling. She eventually finds her way to where Woodrue is basically doing an auction, where he's selling the super soldier. And the experiment turns this scrawny little thug into this brutal monster. And basically christens him Bane. And Bane goes and shows off all his strength by essentially throwing these two thugs around. Of course, Pamela Isley is watching all this, and Woodrue takes her away and basically compliments for her research and ultimately creating this. I actually don't mind the idea that Bane's venom is derived from Poison Ivy's plant experiments. I actually don't mind that. But basically, Woodrue, again, played by John Glover, honestly, even though this character is probably underwritten and hammering it up, he's at least enjoyable and not as eye-rolling, and I really like him. I really do. And I guess it's because the actor's just so likable. Anyway, he tries to basically hit on Ivy, but she turns him down, and basically John Glover just goes great with this one line with, "Well, I can respect your opinion. Sadly, I am not one for rejection. I'm not good at rejection. I'm afraid you'll have to die." and basically pushes her, and basically these, well, poisons cause her to be essentially sunk into the ground. It's just a bizarre scene showing her origin. I feel that this origin just is a complete disservice to what made her great in the comics. Again, I shouldn't be bashing too much on our three main villains, but to be fair, as these were my introductions to the characters, I wouldn't have known about them, honestly, if it wasn't for this. But I'm just not that big a fan of what is ultimately being shown. But anyway, eventually we go back to the Batcave, where Batman does his research and eventually reveals the Mr. Freeze's origin. Again, pretty much ripped kind of close to the Batman the Animated Series, where Dr. Victor Freeze is this scientist who was trying to cure his wife from an undisclosed disease. The experiment ends badly, resulting in him falling into these chemicals that essentially not manipulate, but affect his DNA and basically say how he has to be kept in these like 50 degrees below zero in a suit in order to survive, and he's after diamonds, believing that is what's fueling his suit. And basically they begin to and basically Batman's about to set a trap to, capture to capture this Mr. Freeze. Though he does go off at Robin, saying how, that he almost got killed by Freeze, and he says, "I'm here, alive. How are we supposed to work together if you don't trust me?" And basically we get this nice scene with Alfred and Bruce. Despite this film's fault, I always love the interaction between, Freeze, between Bruce and Alfred. Always great. Anyway, next few scenes we got to talk about is, how Poison Ivy came back. Well, she arises from basically the grave, completely transformed and has a completely different personality. And basically christens herself, and basically, gets revenge on Woodrue by delivering what become basically the character's most infamous, I would say, weapon or skill, her infamous poison kiss. And basically causes a fire to the lab, and basically, with going through it, she finds out that all these researches were done at the hands of Wayne Enterprises, recruits Bane as her henchman, and they go off to exact revenge. Basically, I'm not really sure her motivation, why she really wants to go to Gotham, honestly, but she decides to go. We then go to this odd place at this old abandoned ice cream factory, and how the hell have the authorities not figured out that a guy that goes by Mr. Freeze and needs to remain in a place where it's super cold is not going to be hiding out in an ice cream factory? Honestly, the design here is actually what was used in the first Lego Batman game in the Mr. Freeze level, and whilst the design works for the game, for this film, it's just bizarre. And just to add to the bizarreness, you find Mr. Freeze in a robe with slippers that look like polar bears, and they are watching this ridiculous video where basically is forcing the thugs to basically sing like a choir. But of course the thugs are freezing as they can't handle the cold. Another thing is just, I think, out of character for this Freeze, with the origin they're trying to establish, is first off, the fact that he's got kind of a girlfriend. And the girl is constantly hitting on him, but he's constantly turning her down. Probably showing that he's devoted to his wife, but why have this character at all? It's just weird. Another thing is Freeze smoking. He's supposed to remain in cold temperatures. This does not work for the character. But anyway, it's eventually revealed why he's been stealing the diamond, to create this weapon where he threatens to freeze Gotham unless they give in to his demands, where he'll be given these numerous money to complete his research for a cure. We also find out that, again, these diamonds are fueling his suit to keep him at this degree level of temperature to remain cold. And basically we find out that, you know, that he has his wife stored in this chamber, keeping her alive and unconscious, and basically trying to reunite with her. So it's clear that his crimes, just like in the comics, is motivated, or at least past the animated series, his motivated is to basically cure his wife, and making it a tragic and sympathetic character. The next scene is where basically the sudden arrival of Barbara Wilson. Now, this character is basically going to be Batgirl, but instead of being Gordon's daughter, is Alfred's niece. I've just explained in the cast how I don't mind the change. I actually like it. But my problem is the performance just feels kind of a little bit stale a bit. And her introduction, I'll admit I actually liked. How she's introduced, you know, and, you know, obviously Dick is smitten with her, and Bruce allows her to stay. With, you know, basically allowing her to stay. After all, Alfred's family, so is she. Showing that this is a clear love and respect. And again, we show just how fond that Barbara is of Alfred. But we also find that she has this rebel side, which honestly should always fit Batgirl. True, she should be this nice girl, but she should have this rebelliousness unchained that can't be, you know, chained down. My problem is, for me, this is just not pulled off effectively well with the actress. I don't think she could pull this off. She probably made it work in films like Clueless, but again, I just don't feel it works here. But basically, we go to this like telescope tower now, where Bruce is with his girlfriend, Julie Manderson. And, you know, and basically to the press. And Poison Ivy crashes. It's just a very bizarre, cringeworthy scene where basically, you know, but they still stay true to the character of her motivation with plants, and basically all these resources should go to supporting, you know, the environment and all that. But Bruce disagrees because all these resources would basically cause humans, you know, people to die, starve of hunger alone. But she doesn't see it that way. She sees that these are acceptable losses to save the planet. Again, basically, Poison Ivy is an eco-terrorist obsessed with keeping the world environment clean. I don't mind the characterization, the motivation. It's the performance and just the look that I think just goes against the character, making her sympathetic. Eventually, the next scene to follow in this story is, well, basically, Batman and Robin are here staking out, well, not staking out, but being a part of a sort of bachelorette auction, where basically they are where these diamonds are on display and they're bidding. But there's a scene before that where Freeze finds a newspaper for the Bruce Wayne diamond. Something we find that the character will do is actually surprisingly watch videos of his wedding day. And I actually don't mind this, as it shows that the character is always going to be fueled by his desire to help his wife. I don't mind that. But anyway, just as this is going on, Poison Ivy crashed at the show in an over-the-top and was meant to be a seductive way, but honestly it just becomes cringeworthy. And of course, she tells her infamous supervillain name, Poison Ivy, and all the guys begin to bid on her. Gordon acts like an imbecile, and eventually Batman and Robin end up bidding. Now, to be fair, this did happen in the comics. In Poison Ivy's first appearance, she was the first villainess to drive a wedge between Batman and Robin. So I get what they're obviously trying to go for now, but it's just cringeworthy as Batman actually gets out a Bat credit card. What the hell? This is just getting too weird, too over the top, too cringeworthy, and just eye-rolling. Eventually, Mr. Freeze and and his crew crash the party, freeze people. Batman and Robin end up fighting the thugs. Mr. Freeze ultimately, makes his way, to Poison Ivy and starts stealing the diamonds off her. Poison Ivy realized that her pheromones to put men under her spell, as she used it not only on all the guys there, but also Batman and Robin. But surprisingly, it's not working on Mr. Freeze, because honestly, his obviously changed DNA obviously prevents that. But she's also completely inflexed and attracted to Batman and Robin. Because honestly, there's just something about those two that just attract her, and she clearly gets a kick out of, causing them to fight over her. Anyway, get this weird scene where Batman, Robin chase Mr. Freeze and his thugs. They drive on a giant statue, and Robin feels that he could catch up to them, but Batman basically deactivates the bike not to jump off. Anyway, Batman essentially, catches up to Freeze, even though Freeze froze the Batmobile, and Batman ends up taking down Mr. Freeze, essentially stopping his rampage. We get back to the Batcave, and Batman and Robin once again argue. They tend to do that a lot in this film. It worked in the first one because not only is their partnership was starting out, but also because of the journey Robin's going on. Here, I just felt it doesn't work. I mean, true, maybe, I guess they were trying to go with, how Poison Ivy is driving a wedge between the two, but honestly, that shouldn't work for these characters' second time outing. It should maybe wait to a third time outing where you can have a plot line like this. It just feels too early to have this. Anyway, but Bruce does take what Dick has to heart, goes to talk to Alfred, and talk about, is everything really have to be his way or the highway? The next scene is where Poison Ivy and Bane crash this thug's hideout and turns it into her new one by, turning it with all these flowers and all that. It's a really cheesy scene, but what I really love about this scene, again, I don't really like that much about scenes in this film, but I do like what Poison Ivy wears both here and in the ballroom, because it feels more close to the comic, and this is what I would actually see her wear. And also, as we go on, Bane's skin is further turning green, emphasizing on what the venom in him is doing. I actually don't mind this, as it shows, as much of it is giving him strength, it's also clearly not good for him. I just wished, again, the characterization was more similar to what it was in the comic. But anyway, the next scene is where basically, next few scenes are Bruce is on a date with Julie, but Poison Ivy's in his head. We also see that Dick knows Barbara's been up to something throughout the film and basically follows her to a motorbike race. And basically we find out that, she's been, joining these races to win. And I actually like this whole chase scene. It's actually pretty fun. And basically ends with Dick saving her as the basically rest of the bikers were trying to kill her. We then get a bit of an exposition dump to why she's been doing this. Turns out she's been kicked out of school and has basically been using these to earn money. Again, her parents have died, Alfred's really left. So what she's trying to do is basically take Alfred away from here. Give Alfred the life that he really deserves, especially since Alfred is dying. And it's been foreshadowed that Alfred's not feeling well, clearly showing old age is catching up. And what I really like about it is it's showing just how, that the character is clearly influencing, how the character clearly means to both Dick, as Dick's very fond of him, almost views him as another father figure, more so than Bruce, I would say. Well, more grandfather figure would actually be more accurate. Barbara's obviously worried because they're family, but also we see that Bruce is also worried about Alfred. The scenes where Bruce and Alfred interact really adds more potency to this, because the fact that, that Alfred is literally to Bruce the last family he has left. Eventually, we do find out, that where Mr. Freeze is. He's locked up in Arkham after being taken down. And I like how he's sent into this cell where there's only a spotlight of basically pure of him to stay alive. And basically, I like how, that he's basically trapped in this cell. It was a goofy scene of how they brought him into the cell by putting him in a refrigerator. I'm not joking, that actually happened. But basically, he is ultimately broken out of Arkham with the help of Poison Ivy and Bane. We get a little cameo here in the villain's evidence lockup room, where we see the Riddler suit, Two-Face's suit, but also what people think might be the Toyman and the Clock King. I think they're just silly props and not really meant to be really thought of. But basically, Poison Ivy and Bane break out Mr. Freeze and propose an alliance, and basically have to make their way back to Mr. Freeze's hideout that has now come under police control. But what happened is, well, as we get this nice scene with Bruce and Alfred, just talking, Dick comes in and says Freeze has escaped. They go to Mr. Freeze's known hideout where the police are surveilling the place. They also have been informed about Poison Ivy and Bane. Bane as finding photos of how they got into the country. Basically, they go searching throughout Mr. Freeze's hideout where they find where she's being held. Like Nora Freeze is being held. They find Nora Freeze and they find out just how further along he is on the research. He's managed to get up to a certain part of cure, but to the next stage he hasn't. And this will be actually pivotal later. But basically, Mr. Freeze needs to get his hands on his research, and Poison Ivy agrees that they will get Nora. So basically what happens is they end up turning on this device that causes Gordon and all the cops to begin falling to the ground, obviously freezing. Freeze managed to get his hands on the stuff, but on his research and everything he needs, including the stuff to power up his suit. But Gordon manages to somehow turn off the freeze device, and the cops go chasing Freeze, but he knocks them down like dominoes. It is just silly. But we also find out what Batman and Robin doing. When they were in Nora's thing, they scented Poison Ivy's pheromones, and basically seeing Poison Ivy and Bane. It is this very cheesy, silly, not that well choreographed fight, to be honest, and the music not really helping. And basically, Poison Ivy, tries to get into, take control of Batman and Robin. But she gets really Robin under her control. And Batman is not affected, eventually causing really the partnership to be broken up once and for all. With Gordon basically asking how did they essentially get away. But the next scene is showing the evilness of Poison Ivy, I will admit, and actually like how she goes to Nora's chamber, whatever you call it, and basically unplugs her, essentially condemning her. She then goes to Freeze, who's basically at the hideout and has developed a mini lab, and basically when he asks what happened to his wife, Poison Ivy lies and, basically puts the blame on Batman. Freeze then decides he's going to take his vengeance out on Batman, but Poison Ivy suggests the city that should be just as punished as well. And basically, out of the sadness of the death of his wife, he then goes and has his plan. But Poison Ivy also wants to help have Mother Nature start again with these plant hybrids. Honestly, what? I don't mind the Freeze plan, because that actually makes sense from the story that's being told so far. I could get behind that. He wants to save his wife, but now that he thinks his wife's dead, he's going to take his revenge out on the entire city. That's actually not a bad plot. But Poison Ivy also wants to create this and feels that, that the freezing cold would help her plants. These two villains are the most unlikeliest ones to team up. They are the complete opposite, and for me, it just sounds like it just wouldn't work. But again, we also find out that Alfred is succumbing to the disease that killed Nora, but it's in the very early stages. But also we see just how much the relationship has deteriorated between Bruce and Dick. Eventually, how he's going to go solo. Poison Ivy makes the way to the Tower Scope Auditory, gets Gordon under her spell, and takes the keys to the bat signal. And Freeze plans his devious plan to take on, down Gotham. And Freeze and Bane Poison Ivy and Bane ultimately go to destroy the bat signal. eventually, Barbara gets a hand on a disc, courtesy of Alfred, in a bit of an earlier scene, and begins to type in the passwords, and eventually basically this reveals to her the Batcave. And basically, Alfred knew that, she would be perfect and gives her this suit. But a scene before that is there's a Robin signal up in the air, and Robin is going to see Poison Ivy. But Bruce is basically saying it's a trap, and finally gets into Robin's head, and basically saying how they are a friend, partner, brother, will you trust me now? I feel that this is whole rushed, or, again, would work in the next film if it wasn't so forced down my bloody throat. But anyway, with these few scenes, Robin makes his way to basically Poison Ivy's lair, and Poison Ivy, does her seducing techniques, and clearly wants to give him a poisoned kiss. But she does reveal what basically Mr. Freeze's location. But there was an earlier scene where Bane goes and takes over the observatory, and basically begins to turn the telescope into a giant ice ray, or freeze gun, to freeze the city. Poison Ivy tries to use the poison kiss on Robin, but it's revealed that Robin's wearing these plastic things over his lips, which means that the poison death won't affect him. She then pushes Robin into the water, where basically he begins to get drowned by random seaweed, I guess. Batman makes his way, but essentially these vines catch him and bring him up into the air. And just as she's continuing to make her escape, Batgirl appears. And honestly, I don't mind the fight. It's cheesy with the dialogue, but for the most part, I don't mind the fight. Robin and Batman get out of their trap, and Batgirl defeats Poison Ivy. It also should be, and as a result, the three meet for the first time, and obviously go to the location where Freeze is. They make their way basically downtown to where Freeze is being held, and the city has been turned into ice. And I really, honestly don't mind the effects-ish, even though they do feel off and cartoony. But basically, the three make their way there, despite almost being stopped by Mr. Freeze's main car, courtesy of one of his thugs. And basically, the dynamic trio make their way to the observatory in new costumes, just randomly. How? At least in the first one, it made sense. Here, it's just so random. They're now in new costumes and new vehicles, and the vehicles just look silly. Well, except for maybe the Batgirl cycle. That one actually looks pretty decent. Anyway, the trio basically make their way throughout the whole place, and basically a fight breaks out with Batman taking on Freeze, and, well, Batgirl and Robin end up falling out of the observatory and eventually take on Bane. They take out his tube, which causes him to shrink back to normal, but explosions happen courtesy of Mr. Freeze putting bombs all over the place. And basically, Bane is essentially hinted to have been killed. At first, Batman is trying to use the telescope to defrost Gotham, to defrost the place. But again, Freeze thinks he's won, but eventually Batman, with the help, Batgirl, ultimately does her hacking skills, which the character is known to have, although it hasn't been established how she got it, and basically causes the satellite to reflect the sun's ray onto the city, causing the ice to be defrosted. And with another cheesy line from George Clooney's Batman, he then goes to encounter Mr. Freeze. Freeze says, "Just kill me now, just like he did my wife." But Batman reveals that he did not kill his wife, but has a video proving that Poison Ivy did it, courtesy of a line that she said during her fight with Batgirl. Just as he's mad, he says, "She's still alive. We've restored her, and we'll put her in Arkham with you, where you can work on your research." Now, despite how I just feel with most of this, I do like how, out of all the villains, Batman has always shown the most sympathy to Freeze, because he's not really that bad of a guy. He's just doing for the love of his life. but also he asks for some help with how a friend's dying of the same disease that's killing her, though in the early stages. And we've established Freeze has found cures for the early stages, but not the one that Nora's currently on. And he gives him the antidote, says, "Take 2 of these, call me in the morning." Despite it's a corny line, I actually like this. Eventually, we go back to Wayne Manor, where Alfred has been administered the cure, and they just wait and hope that he'll be restored, essentially. We then go back to Arkham, where Poison Ivy is locked up, and they reveal that her new cellmate is Freeze. I actually like this scene because she's getting her comeuppance, and they're showing why Mr. Freeze is such a feared member in the Gotham underworld, or Batman Rogues Gallery, because he's, obviously if you mess with his wife, you're paid the price. The next scene is in early morning. Obviously, we don't get to see what vengeance he acts on Poison Ivy, but I can say it's a just dessert. Eventually, we get this scene where it's early morning and Alfred's revealed to be alive and well, and all 3 hug. Bruce, and basically, Barbara wants to join the team, but Bruce is against it. And I like how Dick just turns and says, "You're not gonna win this one." In this scene, they do kind of acknowledge that Dick and Barbara are developing a bit of chemistry. Not chemistry, but the characters are being attracted to each other throughout the film. My problem, there's no chemistry. But the 3 basically come to not only an arrangement, but the 3 basically form a team. Alfred gives this one line in, "We're gonna need a bigger cave." Now, despite how I feel about with most of the scenes in this film, I do like this one, as it's more of a family thing. And honestly, I don't mind that Bruce is essentially developing a family now. He has a son in Dick, he has a daughter in Barbara, and we get the scene of them 3 running off into the night with the bat signal in the background, the same way the first film ended. The Batman Forever ended, Joel Schumacher's first one. And here we finally come to an end with Batman and Robin. This film is just bad. Nothing fully redeemable. There are some good scenes that I've said I liked. I like what they've done with Alfred and his character. One of my favorite bits about this film. But the rest, the villains are just too up there. They're just hammering it over the top. But I don't like, honestly, the performance. I mean, I had no problem with the Two-Face and Riddler from Batman Forever, but here it's just eye-rolling. I mean, Freeze with the constant ice puns. God, it's just eye-rolling. Like you could play a drinking game. Poison Ivy, I don't mind the evil feminine take they were trying to take with the character, but again, Uma Thurman plays it too over the top. I'm not a huge fan of the costume design. And her plan, honestly, just doesn't feel work. I mean, you want to create your own planet utopia. That makes sense, but you want to also have it combined with Freeze. I'm not sure if they were going to establish that she was going to double cross him, that would be fine. But I do like the things that she does, like, she drives a wedge between Batman and Robin, and the fact she basically outright kills a woman on life support with no remorse, no hesitation. It's just, Bane, I've said enough. Another thing I also don't appreciate is just how light-hearted this film is. With Batman Forever, I understand they want to bring it to be much more lighter, more kid-friendly, but they still retain the darkness. Here, it's just become too much of a cartoon and a toy ad. The production quality, is a little bit off. I don't mind how this Gotham looks. Again, this is a Gotham I would surprisingly want to walk around it. But I don't know, the tone is just too bright. The Batman, George Clooney doesn't give a great Batman performance, and I see why he's often regarded as the worst Batman. I felt Robin was too whiny. Batgirl, I think Alicia Silverstone was miscasted, or maybe she doesn't have the confidence or doesn't really understand the character. This film is definitely a chore to get through. I see why it is hated. There are some people who like it, and if they can get enjoyment out of it, that's okay. Again, I said earlier in the video, when I watched it as a kid, I liked it, but now they've gotten older, I'm not a huge fan of this one. So, I guess if you're out there and you have a little kid, or a little niece, or a little sibling, I should say, and you want to introduce them to Batman, I guess this would be a good film to start them off at, if they're 7, 8, or 9, because that was the age I was given, that I had when I was introduced to this film. So I guess it would be good to start them off on this film. And then, if they like it and they get older, they really like Batman, that's when you introduce the darker stuff. So I guess, in regards, you can give this a film to them. But overall, I think this is a Batman film that many fans wished A, was never made, and fans would skip. Now, the blame for this film, for me, it has nothing to do with the actors. And it definitely has nothing to do with Joel Schumacher. As he said, he was trying to entertain. I think the blame should go to the studio for forcing what they wanted instead of giving the creators what the fans wanted. So I think it should, honestly, what they should have done is have Tim Burton or Joel Schumacher continue, honestly, the sequel, do what he wanted, still staying true to the tone, the balanced tone, but also give him the creative freedom to have these characters be closer to the comic, instead of basically turning this film into a giant Saturday morning cartoon that is honestly that cartoon episode that you would probably skip 5 minutes into that said episode. Anyway, that's Batman and Robin, folks. Please skip it. And there we have it. That was Batman and Robin, released in 1999. The film did pretty reasonable well at the box office, though it was considered a disappointment, not a flop, a disappointment. The review, it was panned by critics and fans alike, resulting in basically, well, derailing the franchise for quite a while. There was a 5th planned film, with Batman Triumphant, and this basically also resulted in people losing interest in superhero films. True, there would be some films that were decent, but for the most part it wasn't. So this is infamous for almost destroying Batman again. But luckily, in the 2000s, the series would get rebooted and would come back in Batman Begins. Now, I am really excited to review this film. But until next time, this has been the Steven Hour. Ladies and gentlemen, so long for now, and I hope you appreciate the torture I had to go through when reviewing this film. See you in the next one, and please, enjoy the rest of your day, or if you're watching at night time, have a good night.